Hello and welcome to video 7. This is a video about forgetting and then some other memory challenges that we face. By the end of this video, you should be able to answer the following question. What are possible reasons why memory failure or errors in memory may occur? So let's first start out with what forgetting is. Forgetting is the inability to retrieve information due to poor encoding, poor storage, or poor retrieval. So we can have problems with any of the different levels of memory. Encoding failure is when we cannot remember what we did not encode. So we didn't pay attention to information, and so that information never went into our short-term memory or our long-term memory in the first place. So we're not going to be able to retrieve it because it doesn't exist. It's not there. Storage decay is the poor durability of stored memories. So this is where if our memories aren't being used, we tend to lose them. It doesn't mean that they're deleted, but they are decaying, which means that we might lose bits and pieces of them. The theory is that learned material leaves a trace in the brain or an impression that automatically recedes and disappears unless that material is practiced and used. Again, this is the idea of long-term potentiation. If we don't use it, we lose it. Retrieval failure is the idea that although we have the information in our long-term memory, we have retained that information, we're having trouble accessing the information that is there. So let's look at some examples of each of these different types of forgetting. First is encoding failure. One of the best examples of encoding failure is infantile amnesia. And infantile amnesia is the inability of adults or older children to recall memories from early childhood, typically from before the age of 3 or 4. Think back. Do you remember things that happened before the age of 3 or 4? Typically, if you do, it's because you have retrieval cues that have helped you remember or create a memory, like a photo or a video that your parents have shown you. Another example of encoding failure is trying to remember what the face on a dollar bill or a coin looks like, maybe what the details are. Why? Because we haven't paid enough attention to that money to really determine whether or not the money that we see is real or fake. Storage decay was really studied by a man named Hermann Ebbinghaus. And Ebbinghaus showed storage decay with what he called the forgetting curve. And this is the idea that initially we have a significant drop of retained information. However, over time, that evens out and we keep about the same amount of material. Ebbinghaus's research was done with nonsense syllable words. So he put together a group of letters that really didn't mean anything together. He would make up these nonsense words, ask participants to remember them, and then he had them recall as many as they could. What he found is that immediately after being asked, they had a fairly good memory of those nonsense words. However, over time, specifically after about a day, that information was gone except for a few of the words. And the amount of words that they could remember stayed pretty consistent after that initial drop. Ebbinghaus believed that this is due to gradual fading of the memory trace in the brain, and those connections aren't as strong and efficient, especially because we aren't practicing it. There are a few different types of retrieval failure that you should know about. The first is the tip of the tongue phenomenon. And the tip of the tongue phenomenon is the idea that you can't retrieve a specific memory or a specific name or word, but you know it's there. I have this all of the time. I can't think of the word that I'm trying to use or look for, and then I kind of just stumble because I don't have that word right on the tip of my tongue. The next two examples of retrieval failure go together, and those are proactive and retroactive interference. Interference is the idea that something is in the way of our retrieval. Proactive interference is when old information that we have blocks the retrieval of new information. For example, if you're going to move to a new house, You might not be able to remember the zip code of the new house because you are so used to saying the zip code of your old house. Retroactive interference is when new information blocks the retrieval of older information. A teacher having to learn 150 students' names every single year. Because I learn so many names every year, I really struggle to remember my students from the past and their names. So when I see someone in the hallway that I've taught in class, I might not be able to remember their name right away because I'm so focused on the names that I have in my classes current. So now that we've talked about ways that we forget, and this is all of the ways that we've talked about are true for every single person. Now let's talk about the distortion of our memories. We've already talked about the fact that our memories are not stored like a computer. We cannot pull out an exact copy of a memory and use it. So there are a few different types of memory distortion that we need to talk about. The first is amnesia. And amnesia is the condition of a loss of memory. There are two different types of amnesia. The first is retrograde amnesia. And retrograde amnesia is the inability to recall events from the past. Anterograde amnesia, on the other hand, is our inability to form new memories. And so both of these types of amnesia can happen because of physical or psychological trauma. We also have what is called source amnesia. And this is our inability to remember how you learned something. Source amnesia can happen to anyone, and you don't necessarily have to have a physical or psychological trauma to have source amnesia. The best example of this is you having a memory, but that memory is because of a photograph or a video that you have seen. So this could be related to a memory of something that you were never even a part of. Maybe it's something that happened in your family, but you weren't born yet. And that's because you've seen the picture or a video of that so much that you've created a memory. Déjà vu is another type of memory distortion, and déjà vu is the feeling that a new event has already been experienced or that the same scene has been witnessed before. This feeling of familiarity may be due to a neurological anomaly, to resemblance between the present and past scenes, or to a similar scene having been pictured in a daydream or night dream. The feeling may occur even though the person experiencing it cannot consciously recollect the earlier event or a scene, meaning you can have this feeling of déjà vu even though you don't remember where that feeling is coming from. The next idea we need to talk about is the misinformation effect. The misinformation effect is a phenomenon in which a person mistakenly recalls misleading information that an experimenter has provided, instead of accurately recalling the correct information that has been presented earlier. For example, if I am asking you to recall something about a class period and I say, hey, do you remember when I said that you needed your textbook tomorrow? You might say, yeah, I do, even though I never actually said that. Your memory is more willing to create that memory than before. The misinformation effect is studied mostly in the context of eyewitness memory, specifically by Elizabeth Loftus. And Elizabeth Loftus says part of this is imagination inflation. And this is the increased likelihood that a person will judge an event as having actually occurred, for example, during childhood, when they imagine the event before making such a judgment. For example, if a person is going to therapy and that therapist asks the person to imagine a time that they were in an abusive situation, and then the therapist asks the patient, have you ever been abused? That person is more likely to say yes, even if they've never been abused in their life, because we are leading them to the idea of this memory. The misinformation effect is most often studied in the context of eyewitness memory and how lawyers and police officers potentially use leading questions that could alter an eyewitness's memory of an event and the dangers of this. The next idea we've talked about before, and this is the idea of reconstructive memory. Reconstructive memory is the process of remembering involving the recreation of an experience or event that has been only partially stored in memory. Basically, when memory is retrieved, the process uses general knowledge, or our schema, to rebuild or fill in the gaps for things that we might have forgotten. This typically fills in the gaps for things that we aren't paying enough attention to when we've had encoding failure. For example, you might fill in the gap for things that are around my classroom with your schema of what normally should be in a classroom. And finally, let's talk about motivated forgetting. The best example of motivated forgetting is repression. And we'll talk about repression next unit a little bit more, but repression is a defense mechanism that excludes painful experiences and unacceptable impulses from our conscious awareness. Repression operates on an unconscious level, so you aren't really sure that it's even happening. And it's, again, a protection against anxiety produced by objectionable sexual wishes, feelings of hostility, and ego-threatening experiences and memory of all kinds. So this might be the repression of abuse, the repression of things we have done that might be against our moral code, or the repression of a traumatic experience in childhood. There are physical reasons why someone might forget, and one of those is Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a progressive brain disorder that leads to the loss of neurons and connections in the brain. This results in dementia and a decline in daily functioning. The reason for Alzheimer's disease is because of a reduction in acetylcholine. Acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter that plays a crucial role in memory and learning. And in Alzheimer's disease, there is a significant decline in acetylcholine levels due to the death of neurons in areas of the brain that produce the neurotransmitter, particularly in the hippocampus and the cortex. This reduction in acetylcholine is associated with the cognitive symptoms of Alzheimer's, such as memory loss and difficulty with learning new information. Because of this connection, some of the treatments for Alzheimer's disease aim to increase acetylcholine levels or enhance its effects in the brain. And this can help to alleviate some of the cognitive symptoms.